All right. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm not in class. I have a sick 9-year-old, so I have to tend to him. So you have a Google document that goes along for this assignment. Please make sure you have that opened up so you can fill in some information in that document in the graphic organizer as we go here. So our focus here is why European exploration. Feel free to pause or rewind at any point to be able to document relevant information in the graphic organizer. So our big question here, why didn't the Chinese, why did Europeans just quote unquote discover the new world prior to the Chinese? There is usually there's no simple answer, but for this question, there's kind of a simple answer. China was the most advanced country at the time. They had the most powerful and advanced navy. So you would think that they would be engaged in some exploration. However, China had really no major motives to explore. They already had everything they needed at home. Keep in mind that, what Europeans are demanding and what's driving all of this European exploration is trying to get a quicker, cheaper route to China to be able to buy goods from China. So China already has all that stuff. Also, what's relevant here, and this is kind of in the there's a time period from about 1422 through 1425 where China banned trade and the construction of ships. So that's kind of a point in time where Europe is starting to expand their exploration. Meanwhile, China is not trading or building ships. Just to kind of see an example here of Chinese naval superiority, the image of the ship in the background on the screen here is a Chinese ship, and the little tiny one in the foreground is the typical European ship. So we're talking about a pretty significant difference in naval technology between China and the rest of the world. Now, on your graphic organizer, you should see that there are 6 boxes, and you might want to hit pause right now here and fill in. The boxes are numbered, but you can fill in the titles: spice trade, Portugal, technology, nationalism, religion, and Columbus. And let's start to dig into these. So starting first with spice trade, Europe's sweet tooth. It's a little bit of a sweet tooth, and the reality is that food in Europe at that time was pretty not is gross. So spices were essential for covering up the flavors, so that people could stand to consume the food that they had access to. So there's this growth, significant growth in trade and desire for spices. Long story short, trading centers in Europe are booming. Both Venice and Genoa grew rich as a result of the spice trade. The Hanseatic League merchants in Northern Europe are kind of leading that. Trade is continuing to increase from year to year, and it results in Venice, the palaces of Venice, being built on the profits from things like pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, mace, and cloves. If you take pepper out of that list of spices, by the way, you essentially have what makes up pumpkin spice. 'Tis the season as we go into fall here. Anyway, the merchants loaded about 3.5 million pounds of these spices annually throughout the 1400s. And besides those spices, Venetians traded Black Sea slaves to acquire products. So you're what you're starting to see here is the formative days of the global slave trade. There's also a pursuit for profit. The Turkish capture of Constantinople in 1453 put spice trade routes at risk, particularly risk of pirates who were demanding tribute in order to be able to pass. So many Europeans are looking for a way to bypass Muslim and Italian traders who controlled Mediterranean luxury goods and were demanding, high payments or tribute payments in order to be able to trade. Now, moving on to our second motive here, and that's the development of Portugal as essentially a sailing nation. Portugal started a sailing school to get around overland middlemen. Prince Henry provided royal support to Portuguese explorers. This support allowed Portugal to open a sea route to India. Portugal ends up amassing the largest collection of navigational maps in the world. Many believed Africa extended all the way to the Arctic and thought there was no way around it. Portuguese are the ones to discover that that's not the case. And their maps become essential to what seems like, for lack of a better phrase, exponential growth in naval technology. Throughout their travels, if we take a look at the map on the screen here, here you see, not sure if you see my cursor or not, but find Portugal. You see Lisbon here. And you see these routes that were created, were followed and mapped to India around the southern tip of Africa. Now, you also notice that you see the Madeira Islands, the Canary Islands. The Portuguese discovering of those islands resulted in being able to probe West Africa. And what probe West Africa simply means is that basically you have these islands serve as a station for Portuguese ships, Portuguese traders, to then be able to go onshore to Africa. And this is where further exchange of goods and ultimately slavery starts to take hold. As far as individuals go, Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese sailor, reached India in 1498. This allowed the Portuguese to get rich off the Indian Ocean trade. You see the trade route that you see on the map is da Gama's course. So you see that it's a pretty long journey. It's 28,000 miles round trip. He attained the goal, unlike Columbus. He gathered painstaking nautical intelligence for Portugal. He sailed wide around Africa out of sight for 98 days. Columbus was out at sea for 36 days. He measured latitudes, never off by more than two degrees. Columbus, on the other hand, was pretty inaccurate. He placed Cuba at 42 degrees north latitude, which is the same as Boston. So pretty far off for Columbus's measurements. Da Gama and his crew obviously had issues with health, being out at sea for that long at that time, especially scurvy. He kind of made a reputation for himself. He ordered his men to rob, kidnap, and murder at the slightest provocation, and the reputation preceded them. They frequently held hostages when they arrived at port. And in general, kind of created a lot of enemies on the way throughout his journeys. And if you look at the map, you'll notice here that the outward route from Portugal to India almost reaches the coast of South America. Some later development of shipping technologies will allow for Portuguese ships to sail closer to the African coast to shorten up the journey a little bit. More on that in a few moments. But all of this experimentation with trying to find a shipping route resulted in Portugal rounding Africa in 1488. But it was impossible again to sail south, straight south, without some new technology. So here you see a map of the Portuguese trading empire that included Western South America, west coast of Africa, Southwest Africa in particular, and then into Asia. And this allows, Portugal to become the trading giant in the world. All right, moving on to the next motivation here. Technology. Technological innovations crept into Europe's development, largely and thanks to the Mongols. So the printing technologies, navigation, and weaponry are the three big ones that allow for an empire to form. All right. So first with shipping technology, first navigationally, the compass and the astrolabe are important for navigational purposes. And then the caravel, which is some new shipping technology. It's a ship with a round hull and a different set of sails. So it combined a square Atlantic sail, which you kind of see here in this image. Those square sails are good for the Atlantic Ocean, for stormy waters and significant amounts of wind. However, it doesn't allow for tight maneuverability along a coastline. So the Mediterranean sail, which is the triangular sails that you see here, allow ships to be more agile so that they can sail close to the coastline. And it's this technology that allows Portugal to sail straight south along the coast of Africa, and that shortens up their trade routes. The next technology that's important here is cartography improvements. So just having better maps, better navigational instruments to be able to accurately sail around the world. And then the printing press is actually huge in this ability to sail and explore. Marco Polo traveled to China in the early 1400s, earlier in the 1400s. The printing press spread his stories. By the end of the 1400s, 20 million copies of his book had been published and distributed throughout Europe. So as we get later into the century, Christopher Columbus is also able to take advantage of the printing press. It made him much more important than the Norse, who had reached North America, before him. However, there was no, again, we talked about this in class already, that the Vikings didn't leave any written record of their exploration in North America. So, Columbus is really the first to publish his reports, and there were 20 editions, between 1492 and 1500. 20 editions were published and distributed widely throughout Europe. Now, nationalism. So, couple things. First, Spain's unification after the Reconquista resulted in a desire to compete with Portugal. So now you have Spain, who's trying to become a global superpower, an empire. Second issue with nationalism, you have a rise of nation states. So Spain, Portugal, England, the Dutch, the Netherlands, and France, they had some shared common culture and nationality amongst their people. Each had ports on the Atlantic, and each was competing with one another and fostered shipping innovations. So you have this European, at least Western European wide effort that is driving the trade. And then they all want to work to protect and promote business and trade, like I just mentioned, but they also each built up their own navies and weaponry, which is going to become an issue in the future, particularly as we get into the fast forward to the 1700s, and we have kind of like the First World War, the 7 Years' War, also known in the North American theater of that war as the French and Indian War, which we'll obviously get to in class in the coming months. Moving on to religion. Religion plays a critical role here. The capture of Constantinople in 1453 kind of created a sense of religious claustrophobia. European wealth was draining into Muslim hands. And there is a demand for European powers, Christian powers, to find different land. Especially the Catholic Church is on this hunt for land that has not been already occupied and claimed by other European powers or other religions. The Reconquista, takes place. It took, it institutionalized a crusading spirit. It developed a militant clergy, an ambitious warrior caste, and it took 30 generations. The procedures developed that were repeated in the Encomiende system, which we'll talk about next week in class. That's the system that the Catholic Church used to grant land to conquistadores, and all the native people on that land then become slaves. But to justify it, the explorers are required, the occupiers of the land are required to Christianize the indigenous people, at which point they can no longer be slaves once they're Christianized. All right. So there's that issue with exploration. Then coming back to, Christopher Columbus, he hoped to convert East Asians to Christianity and then recruit them in a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem, to try to invite Christ's return or the millennium. So this gets a little crazy here. Just think about the geography of that. You just had world history and geography too. If you think about a map of the world, Columbus is sailing straight west from Spain, thinking he's going to find East Asians to convert to Christianity and use them on a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. The simple geography of where all those places are does not work, right? So we're talking about a significant level of ignorance about the layout of the globe at this point. Now, our final of the 6 motivations, Columbus himself. So he reached, as you know, the Americas in 1492, modern day Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, that region of the Caribbean. So what's so significant about him? Well, first, there are a few things that are significant about him. He allowed Spain to colonize the New World and ultimately become the leading power in Europe as a result of the Columbian Exchange. He made it back. He survived. A couple Italians, the Vivaldi brothers, tried sailing west from Italy in 1291 in search of India. They were never heard from again. So it's just significant that Columbus survived the journey and actually made it back to Europe. He brought glory to Spain. He was made an admiral and promised 1/10 of all future profits from the Americas. And the printing press made him significant. His notes, his reports are published widely, and it allows for him to kind of develop a name for himself. And it allows Spain to prosper. And then there's some reasons he's not that great. First of all, some of the things he was setting out to do he didn't prove that the earth was round. Because his navigational, his mapping skills his measurement skills were not too good. So he didn't actually do that. He thought the earth was much smaller than it was. He pitched a western voyage in 1484 to Portugal. The calculations had him at sea for 4 months. and there was no European ship big enough to hold that much food and water to be able to survive that journey. Columbus ended up fudging by taking the smallest estimate for the size of the Earth and tacked on the possibility of hitting Japan along the way, so they could kind of resupply, because that was described by Marco Polo earlier in the century. Columbus thought the world was actually 6,000 miles smaller than it really was. He wasn't a great explorer. He never realized that he was in the Americas. Actually, he died thinking he was in Asia. He didn't take any translators, jewelers, or apothecaries, all of whom would have been able to easily tell him that they were not in Asia. He was also pretty conceited by today's standards. He renamed himself. His new name was Christopherans, or Christ bearer. And it just gives testimony to the sense of divine mission that was driving his explorations. All right. Well, that is it. That is the 6 motives for European exploration. Again, hopefully you got your chart filled in. You can always rewind, pause if you need to. If you have any questions, write those questions down in the doc, type those questions up in the document as well, just at the bottom, and we can ask those questions and I'll address them next time I see you. Thanks for following along. Take care. Have a good one.